All right, so we're recording now, and welcome to the 30th episode of the Real Fake Swords and the Fake Real Swords podcast. Our honored guest today is Byron Jacobs, all the way in Beijing. So welcome to the show, Byron, and tell us about who you are and your martial arts background.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. It's nice to talk to you. I've listened to a couple of episodes of your podcast, and I like some of the people that you've had on there so far. So keep doing what you're doing. It's going in an interesting direction.
Thank you.
So my name is Byron Jacobs, as you said. I'm a martial arts practitioner. I live in Beijing. My martial arts background is a little bit varied and a little bit long. I mean, I started martial arts probably when I was 5, but with what was available in my primary school, my elementary school, my grade school actually, it was judo. I had always wanted to do something else because I was a fan of watching Bruce Lee movies and the like, but what was available was judo. And I did that for a couple of years as a kid, which was pretty common because I grew up in South Africa. I mean, it's pretty common that judo was available in the grade schools, which is an interesting thing. But in honesty, I think judo is a very good thing for that age group. I think it's a little bit more difficult to start teaching them punching and kicking at 5 or 6 years old. I think judo works well when you're starting to get motor control. I think it's a very, very good base development for young martial arts, but that's another discussion. And following that, I started to do some Japanese striking styles. I did some karate and some other Japanese martial arts. I did a system that was a combined bunch of Japanese styles, which included weapons and empty hand stuff. And I did most of that through my youth and my younger teen years. And then when I was about 15, I think, or 14, I started being interested in Chinese martial arts. And I wanted to do Chinese martial arts, and I found a school close to me. I started training there. It was also an odd style because it was all that was available.
Oh, where was it? Where did you live? South Africa?
That was still in South Africa. Well, I have also quite an extensive travel history in my life. I left South Africa when I was like 6 or 7, and I was in Brazil for a couple of years. And after I was in Brazil, I was in the States for a couple of years, and then I was back in South Africa just around when I was 10 or 11. So when I was back in South Africa, that's after a few years, I wanted to do some Chinese martial arts, and I found a school which was teaching, in hindsight, it wasn't as well-developed or high-level or authentic. I mean, if you want to use that word, it's such a difficult word to use. But they were teaching a hybrid style of what looked like Wing Chun-based northern martial arts with some Hungar influence. And they taught them separately, but you could do them both. And I did them both for a while there. Before I met a teacher from mainland China, who's actually in New York right now. He's been in New York for quite a few years. His name is Longfei Yang, and he was teaching a style of mantis. He was actually in South Africa, and I studied with him. Firstly, doing a bit of traditional, but he was also teaching sport wushu in his school, and so I started doing that as my focus. Obviously not knowing as much about the differences at that time, but I was quite interested in the athleticism, and I did that for quite a while. I was a competitive wushu athlete through most of my teen and early 20s, all the way down to getting knee injuries and surgery, the usual road that takes. Right. And I also did Sanda during that time because we were a school that just did both. You know, he was teaching traditional martial arts, he was teaching some sport wushu, and he had a group of guys doing Sanda, and I was always interested in trying to do the whole package. So I did some Sanda as well. And after that, I mean, I stopped being interested in the sport aspect of wushu and wanted to focus on traditional wushu. And I had a drawing to Xing Yi Quan. Even when I was an athlete, I always liked the expression of Xing Yi Quan. And I started trying to look where I could start learning Xing Yi Quan. And I bought I was on a video documentary a couple of years ago that was done here where I recalled this, but I got a DVD of a basic 5 elements instructional DVD from China. It was Di Guoyong's DVD, and I kind of liked the way he presented things because he was quite logical and clear. And I thought, well, maybe I could try find him, being that he's in Beijing. And I saw that Andrea Falk had translated his books, and I reached out to her, and she gave me his contact details, and I found him in Beijing and started training with him, and that was, I think it was around 2007. So it's been quite a while, and I moved to Beijing permanently at the end of 2009, beginning of 2010, and I've been here ever since. But before that, I came up a few times to spend a few months with him and train with him. But since then, I've been training with him basically continuously for the last 8-9 years.
So you're a globe-trotting martial artist.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, it was strange because I did come here specifically so I could be closer to him. When I first met him, he's a lot of people, and this is kind of cliched, but a lot of people don't really understand the level of a teacher just by looking at a DVD or a performance. That's true. You can get a basic idea, and he's very different as a teacher in person, obviously, than a 1-hour DVD. And I wanted to get closer and spend more time with him, so that's why I decided to move permanently to China. Permanently is also a funny word when you're talking about China, but up until now I'm there.
So you're obviously American, right?
No, I'm born in South Africa.
Because you talk with an American accent, which is why I kept on thinking that.
Oh, yes, but that's because I spent some formative years in the United States, so I have a bit of a strange accent.
Right. Tell us more about that. So you're about South Africa and Brazil. So you're born in South Africa. So you're South African by birth.
Yeah, my mom is a Greek Cypriot. So I'm from my mom's side of the family. I'm Greek. I speak Greek with my mom at home. So and my dad was a South African, and so I'm half South African, half Greek Cypriot, basically.
Ah, I see. So just talk more about South Africa and Brazil then.
Well, Brazil, I was very young when I was there, and the only thing I recall was that it wasn't a safe place then, even, especially for young kids. So it wasn't like I had a lot of time and freedom that I could walk around outside and just spend time exploring the place. It was either home or school, and when you were in between the two, somebody had to be with you all the time. So, but it was an interesting culture because I think the Brazilians are one of the most open-minded and open-hearted people that you'll find. I mean, really, if there's a place that you can find that people don't really see color, it was my experience with Brazilians. So that apart from that, the food was always good there. So I do have fond memories of Brazil. I had a good time there, and I even used to speak fluent Portuguese because I went to school there, but that's all gone since I left. South Africa is always going to be where I was born and always going to be home, but as you know, and you've probably seen more and more in the news lately, it's dangerous, and it was getting really uncontrollably dangerous when I left, and that's one of the reasons why I left. Just you're constantly living in fear of getting hijacked or murdered or both, or you're always looking over your shoulder, you're always locking yourself in at home when you're home because home invasions are a daily occurrence there, and it's that state of constant anxiety that's not really healthy. So I was just tired of it. I mean, I'd had my instances of crime growing up as well. So I'd been mugged, I'd been robbed, I had people come into my mom's apartment when I was growing up as well, and I slept through that, thank God. But nobody was injured. They just stole things because we slept through it. But it could have gone the other way. Right. That's just the reality of South Africa.
Right.
So, but it's a great country otherwise. If it could get over its crime and social issues, it's also a wonderful country. And I would go back if it was
livable,
stable. Yeah, if it was livable, for sure.
So, have you always been a full-time martial artist?
In a sense, yes. I mean, I was crazy about martial arts my whole life. My mom always knew that. I mean, from a child, I was always trying to either emulate what I'd seen or wanting to practice. And she let me at least indulge in that. Some parents wouldn't, but she let me at least and supported me in the sense to allow me to practice. And even when I finished high school, I knew that I just wanted to study as deep as possible. I actually moved into the martial arts school when I was in South Africa when I finished high school, so I could train, because it was about a 45-minute drive away from home. And I was training 2 or 3 times a day, and that's what I wanted to do. So I'd actually sleep in the school 5 days a week, and it was in a warehouse. I mean, it wasn't like I was living in nice conditions. I was sleeping in a warehouse with no hot water in the middle of the city in Pretoria in South Africa, just so I could get my training done. You know, and looking back, it sounds crazy, but you know, you have to follow your passion, otherwise you'll regret it when you're old. And
yeah, nowadays, you know, it's very nice of your mother to be supportive of you, you know, in what your passion lies. Because in a similar topic, you know, which is one of the reasons why I say that contact-oriented martial arts, well, at least in the terms of Chinese martial arts, can never thrive, you know, within China. That's how I think, because one of the parts of the culture is because Chinese parents are so overprotective of their kids that they forbid them to even participate in a lot of the you know, contact-oriented sports. Would you say that might be also the case?
Yeah, that's quite true. I mean, in terms of your average Chinese families, but if you take a look, because I don't know, I didn't get into this, but I worked for the International Wushu Federation because I became an international judge about 15 years ago. I've been judging, and then I eventually became a member of the International Wushu Federation's technical committee, and I work there now in a technical capacity. And we can get into that, but my experience with a lot of professional athletes in China is that basically none of them have gone into Wushu out of their own desire. And when I'm talking about professional athletes, so you've got 2 types of athletes in Wushu here. The one is Taolu athletes, and the other is Sanda athletes, right? And Sanda athletes don't do any Taolu; they just do Sanda. Right. Taolu athletes don't do any combat. But both of these groups, in my experience over the years, even the top athletes here, the vast majority, I mean, I've yet to find one that says he loves Wushu and he continues to practice Wushu and he got into it because he wanted to. At the professional level, they're pushed into it as a career, usually by their families, or drafted through some other sport program. You know, they were maybe gymnasts and they were not so good at gymnastics, so they sent them off to Wushu. You know, they had no future in gymnastics, so go do Wushu. And that's the interesting thing. It's not like Wushu people are coming out of your middle, you know, your average income family here, and they're doing it as a hobby and then becoming really good and then becoming professional. They're either from like rural areas or not so well-off families, and this is an escape that they can have a career with. So come in here, you're going to become an athlete, you live here, we feed you, and you train. But none of them really they don't really like martial arts. And the Sanda athletes are usually in general, are from very rural areas. And their families find this as an escape for them too. Or they come from these Tago or Epo, you know, these Shaolin mass-scale schools where they also send their kids because they think they can get some sort of a career in the future as bodyguards or get into the military, which is the big thing for them, or Sanda athletes or Wushu athletes. So a lot of them come through that system. But you're right, in the general average families here, they wouldn't really send. Why would they send their kids to do that if they can go study and they want to get them to have a good job, you know, a high salary? They're not going to get that in sport. They're going to get it from something else. So, and then why should they put their bodies on the line like that? So yeah, combat orientated is not something that's common with the families in your average Chinese middle, you know, average family. So yeah, it's difficult. But from my experience in the last few years, seeing for example, the there's been a sudden boom here of MMA and jiu-jitsu, in fact, and it's becoming more and more popular. But almost all of those people are already finished with university, and they're doing it because they want to as a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting side of it. But the kids, I mean, I don't know if you know that most of the schools here in China, they don't really have sports leagues like we do in the West in high school. They don't have that.
Uh-huh.
They're usually studying, they've got their head in the books all day, and they're getting pushed by their families even when they're home to study even more, or they're sending them for extra classes. So
I think
there's no time for that.
That's terrible, I think.
Yeah, of course. If you're not being physical when your body is in its most physically developing stage, you're going to grow up underdeveloped physically. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
And you can see it. They come out and they're 20-something and they're unhealthy.
Yeah.
Or they're overweight, which is a combination of their lifestyle plus a bad diet, which is becoming more and more in line with what is common in processed foods from the Western side of the world,
Right.
So it's no good. It's definitely not good.
Yeah, you mentioned MMA, as well. Funny how it is because, I also saw that Vice documentary that, especially in Western China, in Chengdu, all the MMA clubs in Chengdu, have an overrepresentation of ethnic Tibetans. Which I think, the Chinese, it's only a matter of time before the Chinese government starts to crack down on that kind of stuff. I mean, they're not very PC about this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Just like in the traditional arts, okay, people who are famed for their fighting skill are overrepresented by the Huizu people, the Muslims in China.
Yeah.
And which is in the previous conversation, it's like, because you clearly see the difference between the rigidities of Confucian courtesy versus the the simplicity and the practicality of the Quran.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I think that there is a culture of non-physicality within Confucian ideals.
Right.
So, whereas a lot of the other cultures, for example, the Islamic culture, and those that originated from outside, probably Central Asia and other places, have a much more ingrained physical culture than the Han people do.
Right.
So it's interesting. But, I also don't think that today's Han people can be a fully representative. Like I've spoken to you in the past when we've had other conversations, that I don't think that martial arts was an overtly representative practice amongst the Han people themselves. It wasn't like 300-400 years ago everybody was kung fu fighting. That song is wrong.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, in other conversations with the the guests that come on here, right? It seems that from in different conversation with Justin Ma, right, the archer guy that came onto the show as well. It seems that traditionally the Chinese culture actually have a very mixed feelings about people who know self-defense. In an unrecorded conversation with Exile Lee, that's the Hema guy in Taiwan. He was also saying that from a Confucian perspective, where a lot of times people are discouraged to defend themselves, but leave the self-defense to the law and the authorities. And also with the archery expert, Justin, was also saying that from the folk stories, we can tell that archers are viewed in a very mixed light because, a lot of them, archers can kill in a distance. They're probably even more of a threat than martial artists are. And, especially, if they're not in the service of the state sees them as a threat. And which is a similar conversation, with Jonathan Bluestein about owning firearms, or in the United States, it's a similar topic, today.
Yeah, I heard that interview as well. But I think unfortunately, there's quite a lot misunderstood from a cultural and historical point of view by a lot of people that they've oversimplified the reasoning for these things. But martial artists were looked down upon, and I don't know if you know that even following the Boxer Rebellion in China, they were really looked down upon. I mean, I don't know why suddenly today, if I speak to your average Chinese person today and I talk about the boxers, they'll say, "Oh yes, the heroes," and I'm like, "Yeah, but you didn't call them heroes after the boxer. You called them like hoodlums, and you called them the dregs of society, and you looked down upon them. In fact, you looked down upon them so much that you didn't want at that time, they didn't want parents didn't want their kids to learn any Chinese martial arts. That was the result of that. And what's even funnier about the boxers is that they weren't really representative of Chinese martial artists. They were just being manipulated.
Right. They're just peasants with swords and spears.
That were told, "Hey man, listen, you do this incantation and you're invulnerable, so don't worry if you don't actually know how to use these things. Just go out there and fight." You know? And I think that is also part of why there's a fear of martial artists, because that type of cult mentality, which went into hysteria out of the realm of logic and reason, could easily have been turned against anybody. It's not really about the martial arts, but about the mentality that was represented.
Well,
and really, at that time, the Boxer Rebellion was, in one sense, it was guided towards being targeting of the foreign powers, when actually it was almost going to be against the Qing government itself. They played it both ways. They actually managed to manipulate the boxers into targeting somebody else's the root blame for certain issues that were happening in China. So I think they realized that could happen at any time, and it happened a few times. So I don't think it's really just martial arts. It's that mentality plus martial ability. But it's ironic that the people in the Boxer Rebellion, the majority of them, didn't have martial ability. So it's very interesting.
And now that we were on the topic of the martial arts and culture, so I guess you have already answered. This question would be, I asked everybody that come on here that from a Chinese martial arts background this question, right? Because why haven't Chinese martial arts styles become competitive sports, with the exception of Shuai Jiao and extremely contemporary times, the Sanda, right? You have sport karate, judo, right? Kendo, right? From the Japanese arts, you have from the European arts, you have boxing, wrestling, fencing. And so because from a historical and cultural standpoint, it didn't surprise you that the traditional Chinese arts didn't become competitive sports, all went to the performance route?
Yeah. It's not surprising in one sense, you've got to understand that while martial arts in many aspects across the world you might be able to compare them. You might be able to say, well, in general, martial art is a martial art. The development and the history of each place, like Japan and China, is different. And China, unfortunately, had, from the 1900s onwards, had a very unstable period. I mean, they ended their imperial system quite a bit later than most other countries did. So the imperial mentality only ended a lot later than it did in other countries, even Japan. So what happens when you've got a traditional imperial system is that it forbids the influence of other methods and cultures and ideas. So the scientific method, for example, would not have come in as easily during an imperial system, because their whole society is based on that way. Other things like the ability of everyday people to rise up into a high position is not as easy under an imperial system. So the drive to be innovative, to learn, and to ultimately innovation, and and this drive is whether anybody wants to admit it or not, has one result, and that's competitiveness between human beings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And competition, you might be able to label and say, well, the first form of competition in a format didn't originate in Asia, it originated in the West. But that's just a result. That's the flower of a root, and the root is the ability for culture, for a human being to freely develop and to rise up amongst other human beings. That's just how it would naturally result. If you've got the ability to earn on your own ability, then you're going to strive to be better than the guy next to you. That's just how it is, and that's what happened following. The idea of democracy is based on this as well, but this is a whole other topic. So when the imperial systems stop in certain countries, you'll see that this natural rising up of people and their competitive nature and development flourishes, and this leads to excellence. This leads to betterment of certain things or development of something, and competition is one way to develop that. I mean, it's just one way that is a result of this. What happened in China, unfortunately, apart from the fact that they only had the end of their imperial system so late, and then they had the Republican period, and you actually would see that this happened in the Republican period. There was a drive to develop Chinese martial arts in a competitive format. Through the Nanjing Guoshu Institute and their movement, they started to have competition. And then they started to have national level competition with Duanbing. They had archery. They started to have competitive martial type competitions. I don't know if you know about even a couple of instances of late Thai tournaments happening. I'm sure you.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
But what stopped this, and what stopped it prematurely, was the war in China itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what stumped or stunted the growth of the development of Chinese martial arts in line, like you just said, as kendo or as in other karate competition, etc., other formats of martial competition. That whole Guoshu thing was put on hold. China had a war. It had a revolution. It had a communist takeover, in essence, and all of that was put on hold. And then they had the Cultural Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So the process that would have led to developing a competition was completely put on hold.
Right.
And then, following the Cultural Revolution, you had, let's try bring this back, but the damage was done, and not only was the damage done, but unfortunately the natural process that it should have gone through didn't occur. And then they also didn't want to have anything to do with a combat event. They just tried to focus on martial performance.
Yeah, because the totalitarian state views the applicable martial arts as a threat.
Yeah, well, it's not only that. People need to understand that in most democratic countries and in most systems that we talked about, for example, in Japan with their martial arts movements, it's built from the bottom up. It's built from the practitioners who then form together societies or associations who then will create a federation or an association who then will become a national governing body, but it's a filtering up from the bottom up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a natural process that happens from the martial artists feeding all the way up to the control of the organization, which then creates the rules and the competition, right? That's natural. Unfortunately, in the system here, and it's always going to be like that, is that the connection between the Martial Arts Association and the hobbyist is nothing. There's no connection. There's no connection between the two.
Yeah.
The people that are put in charge of the associations here, and this happened when they started the Chinese Wushu Association, were appointed by the government.
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily representative of the people or the best person for the job. You never know. It was somebody who was the best person for the party.
Yeah.
So you can't develop something that's connected to the people and their practice like that. It's just not natural, so it won't happen.
Yeah, but they had. Well, in a hypothetical situation, okay, even for this podcast, say we'll talk about real fake swords and the fake real swords. The Japanese sword and the Chinese sword, right? The Da Dao left the battlefield approximately the same time, right? But then in Japan they have a sport developed in using their swordsmanship skills, which is kendo. But I could not imagine a similar sport, competitive sport that's developed in China using, based on a Da Dao. For the same reason.
No, but you're talking about the Jun Da Dao, the famous,
right,
the famous exaggerated machete that was used by some soldiers during the Sino-Japanese, during the conflicts between the
World War
Japanese.
II. Yeah. Just call it
well, the truth of that sword is that it wasn't really extensively used. The second truth of that sword is it wasn't really shaped like that or put forward like that because of its effectiveness as a weapon, but rather because it would scare the shit out of you if you saw it.
Right. I mean, yeah, there was a conversation, in the first episode of this podcast, Evan Chen gone through, similar to that, gone through a similar point, saying that, it's made from scrap metal, bad metal, right? They have to make it thick and heavy. And then, and just because it's the only thing they had. But even that, right, people should be, regardless of how effective it might be, it's a fighting style that's been used on the battlefield, right? Can be turned into a sport if, they thought of practitioners can do it. At least remember some kind of contact-oriented methods within it.
Well, during the Nanjing period, the Nanjing Guoshu period, they did start to go in the direction of Duanbing competition. And that's short weapon sparring competition for the listeners who don't understand what Duanbing is. And that was a good thing. I think if that continued and didn't get stopped because of the chaos that ensued in China domestically, if that continued, I think you would have today an interesting other weapon sparring competition.
Would probably be more analogous to what the Kali stick fighting?
Well, I think it would be some sort of a hybrid of something that kind of looks like kendo crossed with Western fencing, simply because of the tools they used. But that's a good thing, because for me, I don't like this term of Western fencing and Chinese fencing, because usually what ends up happening is a martial art develops based on the terrain and the tool.
Right.
It's not really another reason. It's like, what is the best way to use this tool in my hand? So, Western fencing is a method to use swords, and it's not based on anything apart from the best way to use those swords. So there'll be a lot of overlap, of course. And if there isn't, well, then there's something wrong with your fencing. There's something wrong with your Chinese martial art. There'll be a lot of overlap. And what will naturally come out in competition is the best methods for that format. So I think it would have looked something like a cross between kendo and Western fencing to a degree, because the rules also will guide the direction that the method develops. Right. That's how sport has always been. Right. And I think that's something that needs to happen again between you and me and all the listeners. I think that the real future for Chinese martial arts on a world stage is to start to develop its own combat events, trying to embrace the different things that are not a duplication of something else. And Bing is one, and Changbing is another.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, people from the Xingyi background or the Baji background are already doing the long pole sparring, right? You've seen those videos.
Yes, I've seen it. Taiwan started doing that a while ago, actually.
Yeah, comment on that.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen what's happened in Europe with HEMA over the last, 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
But that's an art that disappeared. I mean, those sword arts were not something that continued as an unbroken tradition. They disappeared, and enthusiasts started trying to recreate it through a combination of research, personal experience, and sparring.
Yeah.
And they've done a really good job of bringing it back to something that could arguably, we have no way of saying 100%, is closer to what the original method of sword fighting was, then a lot of what we do in a lot of Chinese sword taolu,
right,
they've done a good job. So that process, which again is based on what I would like to call the scientific process, because either it works or it doesn't. Either you can have empirical evidence for something or you don't, is what develops that. And that's a system that could be used for Chinese martial arts too. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and also keep it simple, right? I mean, a lot of the Taolu stuff, the forms, have been heavily modified so much for performance purposes that you can't really find any, combat applicable stuff in it because it makes no sense anymore.
Well, even the approach that Westerners and most Chinese martial artists have today to what a Chinese system encompasses is totally upside down and disconnected from the reality. Most people think Chinese martial arts practice is about Taolu, but it really isn't.
Right.
I mean,
right. Well, at least in Xingyi, at least from the Xingyi circle is concerned,
the more true this is. Yeah, the further back you go with styles, the more true this is.
Right.
And the further back you go with the styles, the more in use they were. So, yeah, in Xingyi for sure, it's all about line training. I mean, doing lines of techniques, single techniques or basic combinations up and down and up and down. Even for me, my teacher, even though I've spent the most time with him out of any of his other students, and I've arguably grasped or learned more than anybody else of his stuff, the forms are not really important, even though I know them, and even though he knows them and he taught them to me. I mean, it was always technique, one technique, over and over and over and over and over and over again. Even down to the point that when he was teaching me a routine that he hadn't taught me before, he would have to sit and remember it. It's not like something that you do every day. What you do every day is line, and it's the same with Bagua, because I practice his Bagua as well. The forms, the Lianhuan or the other connected forms that we have in Bagua are not really important. It's like you do Dingshi Bajang, Lao Bajang, which is just basically single techniques on the left and right walking in a circle. Those are the key. That's the key. So everything else you can do. And usually the way it was taught is that forms were taught at the end, not at the beginning.
Right.
Forms were taught when the student is much got a high level of development, not in the beginning. You don't develop with forms. You develop with the basic techniques and the repetition. And the forms are just there as a way to start taking it a little bit to another level, but also it's a physical record. I mean, for example, my teacher, Xingyi teacher, was illiterate. He couldn't read or write, but he remembered absolutely everything he learned by heart. So Taolu is an ingenious physical record for people that were generally illiterate.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
Yeah, I mean
it was the book in your body. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than that.
But now Taolu is not reliable anymore because of the heavy modification the state has imposed on it.
Well, it depends on I mean, like for example, my teacher wasn't affected by that. A lot of people weren't affected. Our style is as it was taught to him by his teacher. What was affected is the public face of Chinese martial arts in the field of sport, for sure, and of course certain people that are involved in that. So you can still find untouched methods being taught. The problem is this. Because of the public perception of what Chinese martial arts is, what it comprises of, and how it's practiced, due to a combination of misunderstanding, due to a combination of popular culture like movies, and due to a combination of greed by a lot of people, they think that Chinese martial arts is supposed to be forms, and then a lot of teachers just teach in this way.
Yeah.
So that. And that's the other problem with teachers today, because they want to get more money. They have also changed to arts. So, oh no, I'll teach you this secret form or that secret form, or you know what? If you keep training every 5 months, you're going to learn a new form. No, what have I done for 8 years with my teachers? I've learned his forms, but what do I practice the most? The 5 elements and the 12 animals and conditioning.
Right.
This is what it is. It's supposed to be like that. You're not supposed to have 6 million techniques.
Right.
That's not logical. You're not going to.
Right.
And Chinese martial arts is a method to develop skill. They aren't skills in themselves.
Right.
The form and the technique itself is not a skill. It's a method to develop a skill, and you have to develop that skill yourself. And it's going to be a little bit different. Even between my martial brothers, we're all a little bit different in our development of skill, even though we've gone through the same process.
But I think form is limited, right? Even modern martial artists, right? You're supposed to have good reflexes, good reaction time, good cardio, have a certain type of athleticism, a good sense of distance and timing and sensitivity that, in a live situation. But you see, a lot of the CMA practitioners, they don't have these kind of attributes because those are not the kind of things that forms can teach you.
For sure, you cannot. You have to have resistance. You have to have resistance. And here's another interesting point that's become a very common saying in Chinese martial arts today, and specifically what is being labeled as internal, which is a whole troublesome term on its own, because that's a new term. It's not really an old term.
Right.
There was no differentiation. What's interesting with them is because when I say resistance, there's multiple forms of resistance that you can train with. One, you can use long, heavy weapons. That's a form of resistance. That's not the only form of resistance you should train, but you definitely should do it.
Right.
Two, you should strike things. You should strike things. That's a form of resistance training, and that's a form of energy and force training. But more importantly, which is why what's happening with a lot of internal Chinese martial artists, so-called today, is that they think that anything to do with striking something and conditioning your hands and your limbs is not internal. They've been sold a lie that you use chi. You don't use conditioning to harden your limbs and to make them combat ready. That's a total lie.
Right.
If you go back 1 or 2 generations, that is not even close to what anybody... And what's even more ironic is that if you look at the records of old Xingyi masters, they had funny names like iron-footed this or iron-armed that. And this guy used to bash a piece of metal with his forearm every day. What do you think he's doing? He's doing conditioning. He's not practicing chi. This one would train barefoot, and therefore his feet became really hard. Yes, it's a form of conditioning. It's not a form of chi training. And what happened today is they don't even do that. And they actually think that when they strike air with their Taolu and their chi training, that one day when they actually hit something, suddenly their bones and their skin is going to be magically hard, and it's not going to break on contact when it strikes something harder. That is just so out of reality. It's not even... These are 2 aspects that are being overlooked by a lot of Chinese martial arts. While some of them might use long, heavy weapons, very few are actually striking and doing conditioning. Now, if you want to weaponize your martial arts, that conditioning is totally important. If you don't do that, you're really not going to be able to hit something with effect. Firstly, your body's not used to the impact it's going to get. And secondly, you're not used to issuing force into something that's giving you force back. So you won't be able to do it. And finally, the third type of resistance is either structured sparring or free sparring. But if you don't have these things, you're not going to be able to use your Chinese martial arts.
Or any martial arts.
You obviously, I'm telling you things you know, but the sad part about a lot of Chinese martial arts teachers today is because they don't know these things or don't have the ability or skill in these aspects, they don't teach them. But they could easily say, look, I'm not so good at A, B, and C, so you should maybe try it or explore it on your own. Instead of saying that, they'll tell their students, no, our style doesn't have that, and we don't do this because we're internal, and we don't spar because it damages your organs, and we don't strike things because it's bad for your chi, or some nonsense. And this is handed down as gospel truth, but it's not true. It's not true. And this is what's happening now when you actually see these Chinese martial artists coming out and fighting MMA guys and these challenge matches that are happening. Suddenly reality hits them square in the face. And they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and then the state has to step in and rig fights.
That rig fighting thing's been going on for a while, but they also had to blow back and try shut Xu Xiaodong up because he was saying things. And one of your guests was saying, it's about social harmony. It's not about social harmony. That's a misunderstanding. It's about protecting their interests. And that's the problem.
Social harmony is to protect the interests of the state.
Yes, but greedy interests. So, unfortunately, these are not to keep the people, what's the word, happy and harmonious. It's to keep the people from realizing the truth, which would then affect a whole system that certain people are benefiting from. That's the problem. And this is not new in Chinese history, unfortunately. It's like something that's happened over hundreds of years. And the guilt that's usually associated with being disharmonious, unpatriotic, unconfucian, disrespectful, without filial piety, this is the guilt that they put on people to try to keep them from going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and no wonder only Muslims excel in martial arts.
Well, there you go. They're a little bit more down to earth. They're a little bit more set on. And for me, it's not. It's our job as martial artists to speak the truth, to have integrity, and
I don't know. I mean, in Beijing, have you been in contact with a lot of the Huimin martial artists? I mean, are they even that different now?
Nowadays, I don't think so. I've seen a few, but it depends. I think if you go to Changzhou or if you go to the northwest, Xibei, you'll see a lot richer expressions of them. I trained in Inner Mongolia in 2002, and I did see some of them there. And they seem to be a little bit more down to earth, although I didn't see a hell of a lot of what they were doing in terms of combat, but they seem to be a little bit more down to earth in their practice methods. They were doing Shuaijiao, they were doing stone locks, and they were doing partner stuff from what I saw. So, that's different. It's a different mentality.
Yeah, a few more steps up from the bottom.
That's right. So, I mean, we're in an interesting time right now in Chinese martial arts. I think not just within China, but worldwide, because I think a couple of factors are changing things. One is the internet and communication between people. So that's the first thing. Of course, that's changing everything in our world today. So people are much more able to access information and call out nonsense or fake from the truth.
Right.
That's one side of it. The other side that I think is becoming more interesting is that we're seeing that this type of development that's been hampered or stunted or controlled within China is happening outside of China. And it's happened in multiple forms, not only within Chinese martial arts communities, but unfortunately, whether people want to admit it and Chinese martial artists want to identify it or not, MMA as a concept is developing martial arts, whether we like to admit it or not.
Right.
Because it's a format that you can go into. And that's another thing people don't understand. They want to say MMA is a martial art. It's not. It's a format. It's a format. You can go in there and do whatever you want to. I mean, in line with the rules. That being said, over time, rules will shape a format's practice. That's what happens with any sport.
Just like that ferocious capoeira kicker guy that won a few matches in MMA, and same thing with Lyoto Machida, right? A traditionalist practitioner that can, and win in this kind of competitive sport.
Yeah, there's a few of them. I mean, you could also use George St. Pierre as an example, who came from a Kyokushin. I think it was Kyokushin background. Although then he cross-trained, but that's a different story. But yeah, you can go in there, and if you excel at your martial art, you can use it there. But it's a platform and a format that will show you whether your stuff can work or not work. It's no good to just say MMA is not Chinese martial arts, they're just hooligans. I'm not interested in the people. It's a format, right? When you go in there, you're not marrying your opponent, nor you having a conversation with him, nor opening a business. You're testing your skills against him. So his personality, his life outside of the competition is irrelevant in that sense. So people need to focus on what they're focusing on. And that development happened in the West while it was blocked here in China. And I know personally from people in the sport government here that deliberately blocked the entry of MMA into China for more than 10 years.
Wow.
More than 10 years. And there were a couple of reasons why they did that. It had nothing to do with social harmony. It had to do with their own sports systems here. And the fact that they already had a system called Sanda. Can you imagine what would happen to Sanda athletes if you had to open MMA in China? You'd have no more Sanda league. You would just have guys going to MMA.
That's similar thing I think happens in Thailand with Muay Thai and, the relation.
Yeah, for sure. It would turn things upside down, but that doesn't mean it's not true. It means it's true, and it means that you're just scared of it. We could always say social harmony to sit and to hide our own fears and our own greed and personal desires. That's, if you remove yourself from the equation, you suddenly see the truth,
Right.
And that's what happened in the West, and they've had like 25 years of development. Now China wants to sit and look at MMA. Well, you're 25 years behind. You've got a lot of catching up to do.
Right.
So, and it's shocking the people here who never saw, the same way the initial UFCs shocked the people in the West. They were like, holy shit, this traditional martial arts guru got destroyed in 5 seconds by this unknown Brazilian guy who choked the crap out of him. I mean, it's interesting. Reality, if you want to ignore it and block it with any excuse that you have, has a way of slapping you in the face eventually, and it comes out more violently the longer you block it.
Like when Royce Gracie went on the scene, right? He won, and so many martial artists started attacking him, on paper. So which means that he's doing something right.
They still get attacked, and for me, the value of Chinese martial arts, and I said this in another interview, is that if you think as a hobbyist you're going to beat a professional MMA person, then you're deluding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the art that's the problem per se, although in a certain sense it is. But first of all, if I swim on Sundays because I like swimming, I'm not going to go and compete with an Olympic swimmer. We're both swimming. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I'm not swimming. It just means we're not on the same level. That's the first point. So already professional athletes and hobbyists need to understand that they're not of the same level. That's point one. So you're already at a disadvantage. But traditional martial arts is a multifaceted thing that is based on combat.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not getting combat ability out of it, then you're not doing martial arts.
Right.
But you're not going to become an elite, bare hand MMA fighter or UFC fighter, I'd rather use that term, by practicing your traditional martial art as it was given to you. You would have to take pieces out of it and focus on certain things and apply it into that format. So this is the thing. Chinese martial arts is a multifaceted, multifunctional practice that is based on martial arts. Well, theoretically it should be. A lot of the time now, as we've discussed in this conversation, it's not. But it's got other aspects to it too that have value in everyday life.
Right.
The social aspect, of course, but that's like any interactive sport. Right. That's a great point that you should have in your practice. It should help you have a relationship with people that aren't with you every day, but they're your friends or your training brothers or whatever. There's a social aspect to it. There's a cultural aspect to it. You're learning bits and pieces of a different culture, language, ideas, etc. Spiritual or psychological benefits. These are all important things, and of course health, because it's a form of exercise. But none of these is the point of Chinese martial arts. Mm-hmm. It's a martial art first, and secondly, if you take any one of these points out, you can find it even better from some other activity. You definitely can. And that's the other interesting thing, that Chinese martial arts is being sold as a health promoting or health building practice. It never was supposed to be a health promoter. If you want to be healthy, you can do something else or not even move. just
do some yoga.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, how do you think that developing a martial practice is not going to have some repetition and wear and tear on your body? It's going to. We're not knitting. We're doing martial arts. If you don't want to get injured, then you shouldn't do martial arts. That's the first thing that people need to be prepared to understand.
Right.
If you think you're not going to get injured, don't do martial arts.
Right.
We're doing martial arts.
It's a contact activity.
Correct. I've had broken ribs. I separated my shoulder 3 weeks ago. I'm still recovering from that. I mean, everybody can sit and say, "Oh, you see, sparring is bad for you. That's why we don't do it." It's a martial art. Mm-hmm. If you're not prepared to get injured, go knit. That's your activity. So this is what people need. And like the wholesale trying to sell a like Tai Chi now is being sold as some cure-all. It's not. I mean, look at the most hardcore Tai Chi guys out there. They've all got knee and hip problems.
Right.
So,
right.
Taekwondo, the same thing. I met a lot of the high-level ITF guys that in their old age have hip problems from kicking things. Right. Their hip joints take a beating. But if you ask them, would you change anything? They'd say, hell no, I love my life training like this. I wouldn't give it up for the world. The injured hip is part of it. So what? And that's what we need to understand.
Mm-hmm. Now we're coming up close to an hour, to final questions. So, what do you see for the future of Chinese martial arts, and what sort of actions should the practitioners take to advance the art? And what's in the future for you, Byron, yourself?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. In my journey up until now, of course, you learn, you think you go from being more ignorant to being less ignorant, but I'll probably look back in 10 years and say I was really ignorant, but that's good. That's the point. I've realized that Chinese martial arts needs one thing that is lacking, that, as I said, the Japanese arts went through in modern time. If you look at judo, for example, Jigoro Kano went through this process with great effort. And in fact, I think a lot of people ignore his writings and his ideas simply because he's a Japanese martial artist, but any martial artist can learn from what he did and how he thought. He was truly a martial genius for his time, and he did some amazing things. And what I realized Chinese martial arts missed in its modern times that is really important is definition. Mm-hmm. It hasn't been defined. We still haven't fully defined what Chinese martial arts is, and we needed to. The Nanjing Guoshu Institute started that process, but as I said, it got cut off very prematurely, so we need it defined. And we're sitting here now with multiple martial arts organizations and sports and trying to get it into big events and whatever, but if you ask anybody what Chinese martial arts is, very people have a clear definition of what it is. And I think that definition is very important. That is for sports people, and that is for traditional people too. They need to sit back and look at themselves and be honest with themselves about what their martial art is as a whole. Right. And take the good with the bad, but just admit what it is so you can define it for yourself, because that will lead your practice and teach you and guide you on what needs to be done with your art. That's the first thing. Uh-huh. So, like I said, I mean, this goes down to, it's a martial art. So if you're not practicing in a martial manner, you're not doing martial arts. And that's point one, and that's got to do with definition. Mm-hmm. So I think that Chinese martial artists specifically need to take a strong, hard look at themselves and realize where they're being dishonest with themselves and where others have been dishonest with them, and honestly try to correct it in the best way possible. Right. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is to be honest with others. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's all too often now, especially when you see these challenge matches happening, that if the guy wins and he's a Chinese martial artist, the Chinese martial artists will get up and say, you see how powerful our Kung Fu is? Look, the guy loses, and he's like, Chinese martial arts is not for fighting. It's something else. It's about Qi or some other thing.
Right.
Or they'll do the other thing. They'll say, oh, but he's not really a representative of Chinese martial arts. Well, I've been holding my breath for the last 10 years to see when this magical character is going to appear as the real representative of Chinese martial arts. Because if all these guys that are losing are not the real representatives of martial arts, well, then we don't have the real representative of Chinese martial arts on this planet anymore.
Right.
And this is what we need to be honest about. And they need to find the flaws in that, and it's addressable because the tools are all there in Chinese martial arts.
Right.
As long as you learn the right way, and the tools are there. And other martial arts are proving this, and we're lagging far behind. We really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even the modern combat sports, just by what you said about the Sanda athletes, right? It's very reminiscent of Muay Thai athletes in Thailand and what they go through. But then, the question then comes back is that why is the Thai athletes can excel in kickboxing, but the Chinese athletes, relatively from the percentage of the people that does it, excel in a far lower successful rate.
Yeah. Well, again, I mentioned Jigoro Kano from judo, and he's an interesting example of this because he learned classical jiu-jitsu and quite a few styles that were dying because they were out of popularity in Japan, and he learned them, and he learned entire systems. But what he did with it was he modernized it. What I mean by modernize it, he looked at it honestly. Mm-hmm. He looked at everything honestly and modified it into what he called judo. Right. But the key point why judo, and I don't know if you know about there was a match in Japan between Kano's Kodokan people and traditional jiu-jitsu Ryoha that were represented by different people. And the modern, so-called modern judo guys won the majority of the matches. Mm-hmm. A couple of reasons. One, an intelligent approach to practice.
Right.
But the more important thing is that Kano included something called randori as the key basis of their training. Randori is free sparring in a judo format. Mm-hmm. And that regular grinding is what gave them the skill. Whereas the jiu-jitsu guys, the traditional jiu-jitsu guys, were mostly just practicing individual techniques or set techniques like kata and set throws with cooperative partners. Mm-hmm. So this is a very important point. This is something that Chinese martial artists need to start focusing on if they really want to be able to utilize and represent their arts. And I think our ancestors 100 and 150 years ago probably had more instances in their society to use their arts that they didn't have to spar as much, but they actually got opportunities to utilize their arts. And that's something that's lacking in modern society. And it's the only thing that will take it to that level of being able to apply it. And through that process, you might be able to filter out all the stuff that was added to your art that was added later and is not really usable. And
right.
There's a spiritual development through that honesty and that grinding. That lifetime of being tested, going through you could say hardship, but having the understanding and the truth shine through in what is true and not in your use develops you completely differently spiritually. At the end of your training, which you can see a lot of these these high-level judo guys that start talking about the spiritual side of judo or the spiritual side of other martial arts. They only can talk about that by going through all of this other stuff, all these other layers before it. What happens in Chinese martial arts is we've got the philosophers. They're coming out from step one. They're talking about this high-level stuff without going through all the other process. And it's a type of delusion. It sends you down the wrong road.
Right.
And actually, it's the opposite of having no ego. It is pure ego.
Right.
It's self-delusion and pure ego.
Right.
And that's also something that I would suggest Chinese martial artists start taking a careful look at.
Yeah, so essentially is everybody else is getting ahead and we're falling behind.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Right. So thank you very much, Byron, for coming onto the show.
Okay, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Yep, thank you.